couple questions from our
Oh,
friends
I'd be
with
happy
your,
to,
with your
if anybody has questions.
microphone on. You know, we didn't
Sure.
talk about a great many things. Dan.
I loved your piece in the New Yorker from the book, and when I was reading it, I thought of something I want to tell you, and I can't think of it later when I read the book. I will, but what are your thoughts on the Kurosawa film that's in Siberia?
You're talking about Dersu Zala?
Yeah, right. I was trying to think of the
Yeah, I love that movie. I've watched it many times. It's a movie made of a very good book, which is also called Dersu Uzala. And the book is by this guy named Arseniev. And I just think it is such a good book about his explorations in this part of the Russian Far East, in the sort of almost like jungle taiga. Yeah, I have, where they have tigers. And he did his book with sketches. And he was a really good artist. A lot of Russian, 19th century people in general were very good at just doing a quick drawing of something. And he does beautiful drawings, so I did drawings in my book, and that inspired me to do it. And the movie is really a great picture of Siberia, of that part of Siberia. And the guy, Dersu Uzala, who's a guide, who's a native guide of this Russian exploring party, speaks Russian in a really distinctive way. So I got some of the Russian things that I could say, you know, from Dersu Uzala, because he talked in just a really, really cool way. And it was like very ungrammatical, but it was just a cool way of talking. So yeah, that movie won an Academy Award, 1978 or 75, something.
Ma'am.
Do you remember what year you wrote about Heloise and what led you to be writing about her?
I wrote about Heloise. I visited her in San Antonio in 1981. I wrote the piece in 1981. It came out in February of 1982. And I wrote about her because I'd been very interested in her mother, if you remember the first Heloise. My aunt was a big fan of the first Heloise. And my aunt would save these columns. And one of the Heloise hints was for how to peel or how to chop onions without crying. And the Heloise hint was to wear a skin diving face mask over your eyes. And somebody for the local paper, my aunt lived in Norwalk, Connecticut, had done a drawing of that, and my aunt had it on the refrigerator. And I just was so tickled with that. And she said, oh, you've got to read this column and everything. So she saved a bunch of columns for me, and I read them. And then I read this wonderful interview in Life magazine that I also found with the original Heloise, where she just said all this wild stuff. I mean, she was so cool. She said, like, you know, I would like to meet the German who invented a gun to shoot dumplings at planes that flew too low over his house. What? So, and I had suggested this as a profile to Mr. Shaw, and he said, great. And then she died. And I wrote a piece about her. She died relatively young of heart disease. So I wrote a little piece about how great she was, and it ran in the notes and comment part of the New Yorker. And Ponce, Heloise, her daughter, saw it, and we had communicated. And then I thought, well, I could do a profile of her. So I ended up coming out and spending time with her, and it was really fun. And I just saw her yesterday. So.
She came. I know she was coming up to see you.
So we're still friends. So that was 30-some years ago.
I think a lot of people in Texas don't know that she's in San Antonio.
Yeah, and her mother was in San Antonio.
Yeah.
She was. Yes, she is. Well, that's very well informed. Oh yeah, so her husband is a balloonist and all this. Yeah. So, but it was just, and it was the best thing. I was so happy I did it because I left Ponce's house and drove all night and drove up onto the panhandle of Texas and fell asleep in my van, woke up in the morning and looked out at the Great Plains. And that was where I got the idea to do my next thing.
So it all ties back. It all ties back.
Yeah, Heloise was really important.
Yeah, well, and look, Salinger. I mean, you know.
I know. I dropped that in there. It's shameless. But
do you know how great that was? That's like my favorite thing I've ever heard. I can't believe that. I like your Heloise piece.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing. I had this other message from him, the one that followed that, where he said, the person who told me the message said, I have a message from Salinger. And I said, what? And she said, be careful. And I said, what? And she said, be careful. And I said, of what? And she said, oh, people, influences. I said, what?
What?
So when I was in Russia, that's the rest of that story, is that when they said, you know, have you read J.D. Salinger, blah, 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 I said, yes, I have a message from him. And it's be careful, right? Well, in Russian, you know, that's like осторожно, right? It's just like a single word. You can, there are a number of ways you could say it. But
you can imagine a place like Russia, there would be a very easy way to say be careful.
Right. Absolutely.
Right.
It's something you say every other sentence. And so I had this table of Russians going to each other, be careful, be careful, what could be careful mean? And yeah, it was, then that was my last communication from J.D. Salinger.
I just love that story so much. Oh my God. A question or two more before we end here with Mr. Frazier. Ma'am?
I've not read Great Plains or Siberia. If I wanted to read one and then the other to kind of juxtapose what you were talking about our Wild West and their Wild East, which order would you?
Oh, definitely Great Plains first. Great Plains is like 57,000 words. You can almost read it in a sitting. It's basically 3 magazine articles made into one piece, one book. And that you can read really fast. And then take a deep breath, you know, like read War and Peace, and then come exactly.
Do something easy,
and then work up.
Right,
no,
right.
I think Siberia. I think my Siberia book. It's a travel book, so you know it's like 5 journeys, and so you just sort of read through each. It's like in 5 parts or something. So you just sort of. It's a more, I would say, leisurely read. But especially if you've been out on the plains, or if you've been to, you know, the Palo Duro Canyon or something like that, you have these things that you can associate, you know, with it. And it's easy to get into it.
Let's do one more. We can do none more if that's if there is one more. Well, we're very fortunate to have the kind of people who come through here and give us their time, and I know that we're all as happy as I am to have met and listened to Ian Frazier. And please go buy his book.